Hey guys, welcome back. Now, if I told you I was going to review a phone with a Qualcomm Snapdragon chip, an in-screen fingerprint sensor, a 4000 mAh battery, a 64 megapixel camera, which by the way also has an ultra-wide sensor, a depth sensor, a macro sensor, but also a Super AMOLED screen. Now, you'll be forgiven for thinking that I'm going to review a flagship phone, but no. I'm going to review a phone that has all of these features and more, but with a mid-range price. I'm talking about the Realme XT. Now, before I start talking about the phone, I realized that not many people might have heard of Realme as a brand. And yeah, it's a pretty new brand, and they've only got a few phones out on the market right now, especially in Singapore. And I actually reviewed another Realme phone, their budget brand, in my previous video where I compared the Samsung A10s to the Realme C2. And I'll put a link to that in the description below. Now, as mentioned earlier, we've got a 64 megapixel main camera, we've got an 8 megapixel ultra wide, and you have a 2 megapixel macro lens and a 2 megapixel depth sensor as well. Okay, now we'll talk more about the pictures that it takes later on, but looking at some of the other specs as well. So you've actually got a Super AMOLED screen, which on a mid-range phone is pretty impressive. And of course, an in-screen fingerprint sensor, which is even more impressive in my opinion. But coupled with all of that, you've got a 4000 mAh battery, which is much appreciated. And I'll talk a bit about that later on. But also, you've got Corningware Gorilla Glass 5 on the front and the back, which is very impressive. And well, speaking again about the back, if you look at this, the back is really eye-catching. I've been really impressed. I mean, in terms of mid-range phones, or well, any phone for that matter, I can't think of any other phone that has something that is, well, pretty much this gorgeous. It comes in two colors, so you've got this sort of pearl white, and you've also got a similarly designed but in blue. But one thing you might notice about this is the camera bump. The camera bump is quite I don't know what's the word, hefty. If you put it down, you will feel like it's not going to be flat. But however, Realme actually gives you a casing free along with the phone. However, one thing I will say, and it's a little disappointing, if you look at it now, the casing itself is not exactly fully clear. It's got a little bit of a shade to it, a darker shade, which kind of ruins the back of it. I mean, you can still see it, but it's not as eye-catching. So I don't know. Personally, I feel like maybe they should have gone with a full clear without like a black tint to it. But yeah, I think that's a personal preference. Now, talking about the screen, now it's not a 4K or 2K screen or anything like that. It's a HD screen, specifically 2340 by 1080. But I mean, coupled with the fact that it's a Super AMOLED screen, I have not had any complaints at all. It looks absolutely beautiful. Okay, for me personally, yeah, I'm a very heavy phone user. However, I'm not heavy in the sense of gaming. Okay, I do play like Pokemon Go quite a bit, I will admit. But most of the time, it's really content consuming, whether it's YouTube or Netflix. I watch a lot of stuff going to work and back and all that in my free time. I usually watch a lot of stuff, which actually takes up a lot of battery. This lasted me a full day, no problem, with still like 20%, even though I watched a lot of shows on YouTube and Netflix. And yeah, no issue with battery. I'm actually very impressed. Now, just because you don't buy a gaming phone doesn't mean you don't game, right? And good job for Realme for thinking of this. Now, in the phone, you actually have an app called Game Space, where you can actually have different things, like you can block notifications while you're playing, you can adjust power consumption and performance, which is great because if you think about it, if your chip isn't as powerful, you would need these features more than, let's say, the top of the line. Yeah, I actually played some games on it, and yeah, automatically it comes up. I can set whether to block notifications, I can adjust the performance, whether to focus on battery life or focus on performance. And yeah, very impressive. Now, playing the simple games like Pokemon Go, obviously no problem. But even the more intensive games like PUBG or Mobile Legends or even Marvel Future Fight, I didn't really find a problem at all. It was smooth enough. Yeah, I think gaming-wise, it's a great phone, and coupled with the 4000 mAh battery, you've got a phone that can last really long even if you play a lot of games. Okay, so now let's talk about camera. Okay, so like you mentioned, yeah, 64 megapixel camera. Now it doesn't actually take 64 megapixel photos at default. Now, if you've seen my other videos, especially when you saw if you saw my video of the Asus ROG Phone 2, it had a 48 megapixel camera, but it didn't take 48 megapixel photos by default. And it's the same here because they actually both utilize the same technology, which is quad Bayer filtering. But I mean, looking at the photos, I would say that, yeah, it is impressive. You get a lot of detail. I would say that this camera shines in daylight better than it does indoors. The ultra wide, I think it's a little bit of a hit and miss. Now, if you remember with the Asus ROG Phone 2 as well, I didn't actually quite like the ultra wide because I found the fisheye effect at the corners a bit too much. Whereas this one, it's got better correction. So the ultra wide in that aspect is actually better. However, I find the color saturation, or maybe even the color science, is a bit too saturated. So some of the photos that I took, I found like some of the yellow and the red colors a bit too saturated with the photos, and I prefer a more natural look. I mean, if you look at the photos that I'm showing you now and you think that you actually like this kind of colors, then great. Now, of course, you have your portrait mode as well. And the portrait mode I thought was okay. I was surprised at the bokeh effect. It did actually a pretty good job. I took a couple of bokeh photos while hanging out with friends or colleagues, and yeah, I thought it did a really good job. Now the next thing is the selfie camera. Now the selfie camera I'm not crazy about. Well, by selfie I mean the front camera. Yeah, I'm not crazy about that. It took okay photos, but I found that most of the time it tends to overexpose the pictures. I don't know if it does that on purpose as sort of like a beautifying effect or something, or to try and overcompensate the lack of light that it can take in. But yeah, I personally felt that it was a bit too overexposed and I couldn't really find a way to, you know, lower that down. But overall, for a camera at this price range, which I'll talk about the price later, I actually think that it is excellent. Yeah, I mean, if you're not getting a flagship phone, there's only so much that you can expect. And in terms of what you get for the price, I would say it's top notch. Now, actually, one of the surprise features of this, and I actually really appreciate this, is that if you open up the SIM slot, now a lot of phones, in fact, almost every other phone that I've seen recently is, they tell you it's dual SIM slot, but if you use two SIMs, you sacrifice one micro SD slot. Not this phone. You actually get two dedicated SIM slots and a dedicated micro SD card slot, which is excellent. And coupled with a 128 gigabyte storage, I mean, you basically can get crazy amount of storage on this phone. Okay, and one last thing before we talk about the price. One thing that I think was a bit of a letdown was the audio capabilities of the phone. Now, it's got a single firing speaker at the bottom. And well, don't get me wrong, it can actually get very loud, louder than my LG V30. However, the quality that you get at that volume wasn't really good. In my opinion, it sounded extremely tinny. And I actually couldn't listen to it at full volume, not because it was too loud, but because it was too jarring. The level was fine, but I didn't like the quality. And it does have a headphone jack, which is great. Thank you, Realme. But having said that, the quality that comes out of this headphone jack also not the best. But then again, it also depends on what your priorities are. Like for me, I have the LG V30. One of the reasons why I bought it is because of the good quality DAC that was included. Whereas this one doesn't have that. It's a standard one. It's not as powerful. So for me, I could tell the difference immediately and I wasn't happy with it. But if it's not a priority for you, or even if you use wireless headphones most of the time, then yeah, it doesn't matter at all. Now, talking about the things that you don't get with this phone is actually a very short list. You don't get wireless charging, okay? And you don't get an official waterproof rating, okay? Now, I've actually used the phone when it started to rain, especially now in Singapore, we're getting towards the monsoon season, so it's a bit inevitable. But no, I've not had any issues as well, at all. It's been fine, no water damage, anything like that at all. And in terms of the wireless charging, I don't actually use wireless charging, so it's not an issue for me. Okay, so let's talk about the price again. So the Realme XT, all right, this actually comes out at only 469 Singapore dollars. Okay, I'm not sure how much it will cost elsewhere, but in Singapore it costs 469 Singapore dollars, and I think that is very impressive for what you're getting. Now let me repeat that again. Okay, so it's a Qualcomm Snapdragon 712. I mean, yeah, it's not the best, but it's a pretty good chip. You get 8 gigabytes of RAM, you get 128 gigabytes of storage, which by the way gives you a dedicated micro SD slot. You don't sacrifice a second SIM card for that. What else do you get? You get a Super AMOLED screen, okay, which is really good, a big thing for me. And of course, you got a camera that I would say is not the best, but still pretty good. Now, I actually think that for 2019, this might actually be the value buy of the year. I mean, yeah, you still got some other phones that can compete, but I mean, obviously I haven't had the chance to test them yet. But in terms of value for what you're getting, I can't think of anything that can beat this. I mean, you're looking at some of the specs that would have been flagship maybe a year ago or less. So I'm a little surprised as to how they managed to fit all of that in at this price. Now, another good thing about the Realme brand is, number one, they give you 2 years of warranty, not 1 year like almost every other brand. And the other thing is, so I spoke to some of the representatives from Realme, and they confirmed that they have plans to upgrade the operating system up to Android 10 early next year, which is fantastic and is really quick. I mean, this phone launched recently, within the last few months of this year, and they already have plans for Android 10. I mean, some of the phones, like, I got really annoyed for my LG that it took me a whole year before I got Android 9. But Realme already has plans to upgrade to Android 6, and with the specs that you get with this, I mean, don't expect this to last a short time. This should probably last you a pretty significant time. In fact, I don't know if I've done this for a phone yet, but this phone is going to get a very easy Technobabble recommended from me. Yeah, I've been really impressed, and honestly, if I was looking to get a new phone, I would probably get this. I have no complaints. It does everything that I need it to do in a phone. Alright, so that about wraps up this review. If you like this video, you know what to do, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to receive notifications on our next video. I'm JP, and I'll see you real soon.